I want you to go to a specific moment in your mind. It's not a loud moment. It's not a car crash or anything like that. It's usually about 3 in the morning.
Hmm.
The house is completely dark. The only sound is, maybe the hum of the refrigerator. And you are awake.
Wow. Okay. We are starting right in the deep end today.
We have to, because the source material we're diving into today deals with maybe the most isolating experience a human being can have. You're lying there, or maybe you're on your knees, and you are just in a state of absolute desperation.
Yeah.
Maybe it's a diagnosis that just came through. Maybe your marriage has just quietly fallen apart. Maybe it's for a child who is suffering. You pour everything you have into a prayer. You beg, you cry, you ask for a sign. And in return, nothing.
The heavy silence.
Absolute silence. And that brings us to the core question of this deep dive. It's a question that it's haunted humanity for thousands of years. If there is a God, and if that God is defined as love and he is all-powerful, why does he stay silent when we are screaming for help?
Right. It's the problem of pain, but it's more specific, really. It's the problem of silence.
Exactly. And before we go any further, I want to sort of set the stage for who this is for, because the sources we're looking at today, and they range from theology to psychology, they make a very important distinction. This isn't just an intellectual exercise.
Right. We aren't here to debate atheists or, solve a logic puzzle for a philosophy class. The sources are so clear that this deep dive is for the believer. It's for the person who has, as one author put it, kneeling knees and wet eyes.
That's a powerful image.
It is, because the silence of God isn't really a crisis for someone who doesn't believe he's there. It's a crisis for the person who does trust him and suddenly feels like that trust has just been shattered.
It's the disconnect.
It's a total disconnect between what you believe, God is good, and what you're experiencing, which is God is gone.
And I want to be upfront with you, the listener here. We are not going to offer a cheap bandage today. The sources explicitly warn against the three-step fix or those catchy slogans you see on bumper stickers.
Oh, those usually just make the pain worse.
They really do. So our mission today is different. We are going to try to descend into that silence. We want to understand the anatomy of silence and see if there's any meaning to be found at the bottom of it.
Okay, so let's start there, the anatomy of silence.
So reading through the material, I found this psychological distinction that really, it just stopped me in my tracks. The research suggests that human beings do not actually fear pain the most.
That sounds completely counterintuitive. I mean, we spend our whole lives trying to avoid pain.
We do, but the argument here is that humans are actually incredibly resilient. We can endure physical torture, sickness, grief, if, and this is the huge variable, if we know it has a meaning or if we know we aren't alone in it.
Okay.
What truly breaks a person isn't the suffering. It is meaningless suffering, or suffering in total isolation.
It's the void.
The source used an analogy that I think perfectly captures this. It's about a child.
The crying child analogy. I remember this one.
Right. So imagine a toddler. They trip and fall, they skin their knee, it's bleeding, it stings, they immediately start screaming. But they look up and see their parent. The parent rushes over, picks them up, maybe just holds them or says, "I've got you."
The pain is still there. The knee still hurts.
Exactly. The physical sensation hasn't changed at all, but the panic stops. The child calms down because the connection is there. They aren't alone in their pain.
Right. Now, play out the nightmare version of that.
The nightmare version is the child falls, they are bleeding, they look up, screaming, reaching out, and the parent is standing 3 feet away, just staring.
Blank face.
Blank face, arms crossed, saying nothing, doing nothing.
That is terrifying.
It shifts from physical pain to, psychological terror.
And that is exactly what the source material argues is happening during spiritual silence. When you pray and get no answer, it triggers that primal blank face fear. It's not just, God didn't fix my problem. It's, is he even looking at me? Does he care? Am I alone?
It feels like abandonment.
Precisely. And that creates a crisis that just destroys trust. Because if you talk to people in the middle of a tragedy, a lot of them will say something really surprising. They'll say, I don't necessarily need a miracle. I don't need God to snap his fingers and make it all go away. I just need to know he hasn't left me.
They need the hug, not necessarily the bandage.
Right. So when that silence stretches on, it feels like the line has gone dead.
Yeah.
And that is where faith just starts to crumble.
This brings me to a part of the research that I found genuinely surprising. I was expecting, the religious sources to try and cover this up. If you're trying to sell faith, you want the highlight reel, parting the seas, healing people, instant answers.
Of course.
You don't want to talk about the times God just ignored people.
You'd think so. I mean, from a marketing perspective, silence is bad PR.
But the sources point out that the Bible is, well, it's brutally honest about this. It doesn't hide the silence at all.
No, it really doesn't. And that's a massive point that often gets overlooked.
Yeah.
The biblical precedent for silence is, ironically, shockingly loud.
Let's talk about Job. I feel like everyone knows the name, but maybe we miss the nuance of the story.
Job is the archetype of this experience.
Mm-hmm.
And it's so important to remember, Job was a good guy. He wasn't being punished for some crime. He was righteous.
Mm-hmm.
And yet his life is systematically dismantled. He loses his children, his wealth, his health.
Yeah.
The text describes him sitting in the dust, literally scraping his sores with broken pottery.
It's a gruesome image, and he prays.
He prays, he cries out, he demands a hearing from God.
Mm-hmm.
And for 37 chapters, absolute silence. God says nothing.
And the interesting thing the source highlighted is what Job actually asks during that time. He doesn't ask the modern question, which would be, does God even exist?
No. Job never doubts God exists. His crisis is relational. He asks, why do you hide your face? He asks, why are you silent? He's struggling with being ghosted, not with God's existence.
And it's not just Job. The source dove into the Psalms, specifically what they call the Psalms of Lament. I always thought the Psalms were mostly, happy praise songs.
A huge portion of them are actually complaints. They are raw, aggressive, really confusing songs. You have writers basically yelling at the sky, saying, God, wake up. Why are you sleeping? Why do you stand so far away?
But I have to play devil's advocate here. Why include that in a holy book? I mean, if I'm an editor compiling the Bible, I'm cutting the part where the guy accuses God of sleeping on the job.
But that's it. The fact that they are included is the key insight. By keeping these stories and songs, the text is validating the experience of silence. It proves that God is not afraid of our questions. He's not afraid of our anger or our confusion.
It's almost like it's giving us permission.
It is permission. It's saying, yes, this happens. Yes, it feels like this. You aren't crazy, and you aren't a bad believer for feeling abandoned. The silence is a standard part of the journey, not some kind of detour.
But then the sources take us to an even more intense example, and I have to admit, I hadn't really connected the dots on this one before. We go from Job to Jesus.
This is the climax of the argument in the source material, the silence of the cross.
We're talking about the crucifixion, and specifically that moment right near the end where Jesus cries out.
My God, why have you forsaken me?
Let's just pause and sit with that for a second. In the Christian tradition, this isn't just a prophet or a good teacher. This is God the Son speaking to God the Father.
It creates this theological paradox that is just mind-bending. The source really emphasizes the weight of this. If Jesus himself, the person who is supposed to be in perfect union with God, feels forsaken, if he experiences the silence, then the implications are just staggering.
But what does that mean for me? Because honestly, that sounds terrifying. If even Jesus gets the silent treatment, what hope do I have?
Well, the source flips that logic. They argue that this means God does not stand outside of human suffering. He doesn't just sit up in heaven watching us squirm like lab rats.
So he's not the parent with the blank face?
No. The claim is that he entered into the silence itself. He experienced the parent turning away.
So he knows what that isolation feels like from the inside.
Exactly. When you are sitting in that dark room at 3 a.m., feeling totally abandoned, the theological claim here is that God isn't looking down at you from a distance. He is sitting there with you because he has experienced that exact same abandonment.
That reframes the whole thing.
It does. The cross wasn't a loud victory with lightning bolts and angels saving the day. It was a 3-day silence, as the source puts it. It suggests that our suffering isn't us being abandoned by God, but maybe it's us sharing an experience with God.
That is a heavy concept. Sharing an experience with God by feeling abandoned by him.
It's a paradox, but it's the core of the Christian answer to suffering. It's not an escape from silence, but a presence within it.
Which leads us to the next big section of this deep dive. Reframing silence. The source argues that silence does not equal absence. But I have to be the skeptic again here.
Please do.
That sounds like a bit of a cop-out. Oh, he's silent because he's close. It feels like something you say to make someone feel better when you just don't have an answer. How do the sources back that up?
They go back to that analogy of human relationships. Think about deep human love. When you first meet someone, or in a more superficial friendship, what do?
You talk a lot.
Right. You fill the air with words because silence feels awkward. Silence feels like a disconnect. So you chatter to bridge the gap.
True.
But think about an old married couple or two best friends who have known each other for 30 years. They can sit in a room together for hours just reading or driving and not say a single word. Is that silence and absence of love?
No, not at all. Usually it's a sign of a really deep connection, a comfortable silence.
Exactly. The source suggests that sometimes God's silence is that kind of presence. It's a transition from a relationship based on constant feedback, I do this, you give me that, to one based on deep, abiding trust.
But, and here's the human advocate in me again, it doesn't feel like a cozy silence when you're in pain. It feels like being ignored. Why would God choose that method? Why not just say, hey, I'm here, and then be quiet?
The source lists a few possibilities, and none of them are, easy pills to swallow. One possibility is respect for human freedom. If God constantly intervened with a booming voice every time we asked, we wouldn't be free agents. We'd be puppets.
We'd just be conditioned,
Yeah.
like Pavlov's dogs.
Right. If the sky opened up every time you stub your toe, you wouldn't really love God. You'd just be reacting to the stimulus. Another possibility mentioned is growth. The source calls it a space allowed for the person to grow. It's the idea that certain types of spiritual maturity can only happen in the dark.
Like developing film.
That's a great analogy. You need the darkness for the image to develop. If you expose it to the light, to the answer too soon, you ruin the depth of it. The source talks about the slow reality of healing. Some pains can't be fixed or explained instantly. God doesn't always work on our timeline.
So, okay, we have this reality of silence. We have the precedent for it in Job and Jesus. We have the theology of developing in the dark. But practically speaking, how do you survive it? How do you keep your faith intact when the silence is just deafening?
This is critical for anyone listening who is struggling right now. The source differentiates between two types of faith, and you really need to identify which one you have.
Okay, let's break this down.
The first one is what you could call fair weather faith, or transactional faith. It's based entirely on emotion and results. I pray, I get an answer, I feel good, I bleed.
That's an exchange. I put a coin in the vending machine, I get a gumball out.
Exactly. And that faith works fine until the machine eats your coin. When the results stop, the faith evaporates.
And the second type?
The second type is based on loyalty, on trust. It's believing even when the emotional validation is gone. It's faith in a vacuum.
But how do you get there? It feels impossible to shift from one to the other when you're in the middle of that pain.
The source clarifies what God actually promises here, which I think is a huge misconception that sets us up for failure. We often think the promise is, you won't suffer, or I will fix it right now.
Right, that's what we want to hear.
But the source is very clear. God never promised you won't suffer. The promise was, I will be with you.
But again, there's the emotional disconnect. I will be with you is a great promise on paper, but if I can't feel it or hear it, it's really hard to hold on to.
And that is the crucible. That's the challenge. Deep faith has to function without the emotional validation of a booming voice. It's learning to trust the character of God even when you can't see the hand of God.
So let's get practical. The listener is asking, okay, I get the theory, but what do I do tonight when I close my eyes and it's quiet? The source gives some advice that I found surprisingly refreshing because it wasn't, fake it till you make it.
No, absolutely not. The advice is actually the opposite of that. It's radical honesty.
Honesty with God.
Yes. The source advises us to be brutally honest. Don't pretend to be strong. Don't pretend you aren't angry. If you're confused, say, I don't understand. If you feel abandoned, say, I feel abandoned.
It goes right back to the songs we talked about. If the writers of the Bible could yell at God, then so can you.
Exactly. The worst thing you could do is put on a brave face. The silence is a place where superficial faith goes to die. If your faith is just a performance, the silence will kill it. But if you can be honest in it, the silence becomes a place where a deeper, more refined faith is born.
The source uses a phrase I really liked, the stay mindset.
Dare to stay. That's the core action item. You don't have to fix the situation. You don't have to conjure up happy feelings. You just have to decide not to walk away. You stay in the room. You stay in the relationship, even when the other side is completely silent.
It reminds me of sitting by a hospital bed of someone in a coma. They can't talk to you. They can't thank you. You can't fix them, but you stay.
And that staying is the act of faith. That loyalty is what the sources call the deeper work.
Can you elaborate on that, on the deeper work?
It's the idea that in the silence, God might be doing something internal rather than external. A visible miracle changes your circumstances. You get the job, the cure, whatever. But navigating the silence, that changes you. It changes your character, your depth, your capacity for empathy.
It's the difference between giving a child a toy to stop them crying and sitting with them until they learn resilience.
That is a perfect way to put it. The toy fixes the moment. The resilience fixes the future.
We're coming to the end of this deep dive, and I want to try to synthesize what we've uncovered. We started with this idea that silence feels like abandonment, that it triggers a really primal fear.
But through the sources, we've seen that silence is actually a recurring theme in the history of faith. From Job all the way to Jesus, it's not a bug in the system, it almost seems to be a feature.
We've learned that God's silence is not the same as his absence, that just because the line is quiet doesn't mean the connection is broken.
And that prayers that aren't answered right away are not forgotten.
Before we go, I want to leave the listener with the final provocation from the source material. It's a question that really stops you in your tracks. It shifts the focus from God, explain yourself, to something much more internal.
It really does. The source ends by suggesting that the ultimate question isn't, why is God silent? We may never get a satisfying answer to that on this side of eternity.
So what is the question?
The question is, do we dare to stay with him even when he says nothing?
That is a hard question. It puts the ball back in our court.
It does. It asks if we are in this for the benefits or for the relationship.
Do we dare to stay? Something to think about tonight. Thank you for walking through this heavy but I think beautiful topic with us.
Thank you.
And to you listening, whatever you are going through, remember, silence doesn't mean you're alone. We'll catch you on the next deep dive.